can feel the magic in the air, knowing miracles are everywhere when you listen to the wisdom of your heart. Listen with your heart. Listen with your heart.
Today's question comes from a man that says, "Dear Eve, I am just not successful in love. I go out on dates, maybe even go out with someone for a few months, but at some point they always break up with me or call it off. I'm just not sure what I'm doing wrong. The most recent woman just said that she didn't feel like we would work out. The one before that said that I wasn't her type after all. Do you have any suggestions?" This is a really challenging thing in relationships because there's often that point where we don't know what went wrong. And there may be no way to find out. There's no way that we're going to get that information from the other person. So the opportunity here is to become an expert, if you will, your own expert on what it's like to be with you. And that requires self-observation. So as you date, I invite you to be self-observant. Notice what you think about. Notice what you talk about. Notice how you are, how you behave, what you do. Notice if there's a point at which things turn around. It's an interesting thing to observe. It's actually a great exercise to ask yourself, what's it like to date me? What's it like to have a meal with me? What's it like to make love with me? What's it like to be asked to make love by me? What's it like? Even driving in the car, what's it like to drive with me? When we simply stop and do that kind of inquiry and look at it, to use a cliche, from the other person's perspective or put ourselves in their shoes, we start to see that we do things and say things that we might not even be aware of. One of the things that's interesting with this is that I have worked as an online dating expert, helping people look at their profiles and evaluate them for themes. And what themes are recurring messages that typically the person who wrote them isn't aware of at all. And we all give out these themes all the time. My professor in college said, social structure leaves its fingerprints on everything it touches. And when I wondered what that meant, I started to realize what he was talking about. We leave evidence everywhere of who we are and how we are. And so as it related to these online dating themes, I would go in and evaluate the profile and discover that someone said beer 4 times during their profile message, and they didn't even know they did it. So when I said, "Is beer really important?" you go, "Oh no, beer's not that important." Then did you want it 4 times in your profile? Or a man wrote to me and asked me to evaluate his online profile and said that figure and appearance wasn't that important to him. What he really wanted was a woman with a big, beautiful heart who he could share his life with. So I went to look at his profile, and the message he was putting out was not what he told me. He had hourglass figure, and he mentioned physical qualities or characteristics in multiple places through his profile, even though that wasn't really what his focus was. So you might find, if you evaluate what you're doing and saying on dates, that you have a theme that is turning people off. So I invite you to notice that. Do you always talk about past dates? Do you always talk negatively about the future? Do you put yourself down? Are you critical? Are you controlling? The majority of the time I found is that people either operate from what I call a need for approval, or they operate from a need for control. And both of these are like opposite sides of a magnet, if you will, just like a polarized magnet. And we tend to lead with one or the other in relationship, and we don't even know we're doing it. And consequently, we attract the opposite. So if I'm operating from a need for approval, I attract someone with a need for control. And if I'm operating with a need for control, I attract people with a need for approval. So if you keep that in mind, if you're going out on these dates and the truth is that you're feeling needy, you're discouraged, you've had a hard time because nobody's wanted you, it's very possible you're showing up needy. And that very sense of neediness, just like a magnet will attract its opposite, will evoke the controlling and judgmental nature of the people you're dating, and then you'll blame them. You'll think there's something wrong with them, when in fact you're just not in alignment with your most authentic self. And this is where the work comes back to us. Instead of looking out at the world and saying, why are they this way? Why are they behaving this way? Why are they doing this? We want to come back and say, what am I doing? Am I aligned with my highest self? And fill yourself up before you go out on a date with what your own value is, what your strengths are, what your gifts are, what your power is, so that you can really be clear, why would somebody want to date you? Know why, so that as you go forth, you can communicate that to them. The other thing I want to ask you about is, are they your choice as well? Because what I've seen is that when people get rejected, the ego gets triggered, and we often start being upset that they don't want us, when in truth we may not actually want them. I had a woman call into my show and say, I date these guys and they never want to marry me. And I said, do you want to marry them? And she goes, oh no, I wouldn't marry them if they asked me. And then why do you want them to ask you? It's just a trick of the ego. So be careful and conscious in your effort to find love, that you're not trying to get people to love you and want to be with you who aren't actually a good match for you. That's the first place to start, is what's your inward truth? What's your goodness? What are your strengths? What do you bring to the table? And then, is this a match for you? Is this the right person for you to be seeking? And see what kind of results you get from there.
Listen to your heart. Listen to your heart.